Welcome to episode 175 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show the public who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Norman Wight, who served in the FBI for 28 years. Initially assigned to the Lubbock Resident Agency out of Dallas, Texas, he worked fugitives and general crimes before being transferred to the San Diego Division, where he investigated white-collar and environmental crimes. In this episode, Norm Wight reviews the Stanley Mark Rifkin bank fraud case. Rifkin embezzled $10 million from a bank in L.A. via a wire transfer to Switzerland, where he converted the money into diamonds before smuggling them into the United States. Based on a tip, Norm Wight and Los Angeles Division agent Robin Brown arrested Rifkin and recovered the diamonds. The case tested case law regarding the validity of exigent circumstances when executing arrest warrants. Norm spent most of his career as the senior resident agent in Vista, California, supervising 8 agents who conducted investigations into a wide variety of criminal investigations. He was a general police instructor in the area of defensive tactics and SWAT, as well as a SWAT team leader involved in more than 100 tactical operations. Upon his retirement and before moving to Montana, Norm Wight worked cold case homicides for the Escondido, California Police Department for 7 years. And in 2008, one of his cases was named the Latent Hit of the Year. Norm and his Escondido detective partner were able to solve the city's oldest unsolved murder case after submitting a bloody fingerprint to AFIS, the FBI Integrated Automatic Fingerprint Identification System. This was another entertaining and educational episode. Norm and I have a really interesting conversation about arrest warrants that I think you'll also find interesting. I do need to let you know that something happened about 30 minutes or 32 minutes into the interview where the audio goes kind of wacky. You can either skip through that part, or if you can bear with it, the audio returns back to normal. A few things before we get to the interview. First of all, I want to thank you so much. Book sales for FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, are good. And I want to thank all of you for the fabulous reviews that you've posted on Amazon. At this time, we have about 36 5-star reviews. So thank you. Reviews help readers find good books. And remember, the book is available wherever books are sold. If you're listening on a podcast app, there's a link to more information about FBI myths and misconceptions in the description of this episode. And speaking about the book, I just want to remind you of the virtual book club that I'll be hosting on Thursday, July 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The link to join me on Zoom, where we can talk to each other directly and you can ask your questions about the book, is posted on my website in this month's Reader Team email, and I'll also post the link on social media a few days before the virtual book club event. Again on Thursday, July 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Hope to see you there. Thank you. Now here's the show. I'm excited to introduce my guest, Norm Wight. Hi, Norm. How are you?
Hi, Jerry. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I will apologize ahead of time if there's any disturbance or noise during this audio. My next door neighbor is getting a new roof, and I am getting a whole new master bath. So there's contractors and workers all over the place, but it's been quiet this afternoon. So we're going to proceed because, as they say, the show must go on.
Yeah, we'll make it work.
Fantastic. The great thing about doing this podcast is I get to learn about some fascinating cases. This was a case I was really pleased to learn more about. the theft occurred way back in 78?
78, yes.
And at the time, I understand at the time it was considered the biggest bank theft in history.
It was the biggest at the time, and I don't know about now, but yeah, it was the biggest bank theft in U.S. history.
All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started on the case review, and then just like my normal procedure after we're done with the case review, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you, when you joined the FBI and why you joined the FBI, and of course, we want to hear what you're doing now. So why don't you start with the case review?
Okay, sounds good. The best place to start is with Special Agent Robin Brown, an agent in Los Angeles, in the headquarters of Security Pacific National Bank, sitting with a senior vice president auditor. And he told the banker, that just over a week ago, someone stole $10 million from your bank. And the auditor was unbelieving. He said, how could this happen without me even knowing? And he said, are you sure? And Robin said, yeah, I'm sure. We're already looking for the guy that did it. So the largest bank theft in U.S. history had gone a week without even being discovered. That's unusual already because normally we don't solve a case until it's been reported. But here's how it went down. Stanley Mark Rifkin was a 32-year-old computer consultant, twice divorced, living in Sepulveda, a suburb of Los Angeles. He had a bachelor's degree from Cal State Northridge and a master's degree from UCLA, both in some kind of computer science. And he was doing some subcontracting for another company on computers at Security Pacific National Bank. And part of his work was in the wire transfer room. So on October 25th, 1978, Rifkin went into the wire transfer room in downtown LA, and through a bit of subterfuge, he got the daily wire transfer code. And then he left, went to a phone booth, and called the wire transfer room, identified himself as Mike Hansen, bank officer, and he wire transferred $10.2 million to the account of Russell Maz, a Russian diamond broker at the Wozod Bank in Zurich, Switzerland. At the time, Security Pacific wire transferred about $4 billion a day. So $10.2 million was not an unusually large transaction. But he had set it up beforehand. He'd gone to an attorney friend of his, Gary Goodgame in LA, and he'd spun him a story about how he represented a company who wanted to acquire diamonds for cash. And Goodgame referred him to Lon Stein, a diamond consultant in LA. So Robin hired Mr. Stein to go to Zurich and purchase diamonds from Russell Maz. And of course, he'd set it up with Russell Maz as well. He said, I'm going to be wiring in some money. Mr. Stein will be there to pick out some diamonds. He'll buy the diamonds, and then a courier will come to pick them up. So that all happened. The money went to Russell Maz. Mr. Stein went to Zurich, selected diamonds, and he only got about $8 million worth of the quality that had been specified by Stanley Rifkin. So he had an extra $2 million worth of cash left over. He tried to call Rifkin, couldn't get him, and finally he just sent the money to a trusted friend, the account of a trusted friend, sent the extra $2 million to that account. So he had a little over $8 million worth of diamonds and around $2 million in another account.
Why diamonds?
They're untraceable, and they can be negotiated. It's not like a something with a serial number that you can positively identify. So that was it. I'm sure that was Rifkin's thinking at the time. So Stan went to Zurich, went to Russellmaz. After a little confusion, he gave him the courier code, which was his home phone number in Sepulveda. And then he picked up the diamonds, put them in his luggage, and went to first Luxembourg, where he spent a day, and then he packed the diamonds in a money belt and in his luggage and flew back to Los Angeles.
And this was Stein who did this?
No, this was Stan Rifkin.
Oh,
Rifkin.
So Stan did travel to Europe too. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that he had Mr. Stein travel there on his behalf, but he went there too.
He went there too. Stein was gone. Rifkin showed up and represented himself as the courier and got the diamonds. So he's back in Los Angeles now, and he recontacts Gary Goodgame in a hotel where Stan had put himself. And Goodgame went to see him, and he actually bragged about the theft from Security Pacific and gave Gary 3 diamonds to hold for him. This is the first that Goodgame realized that this was all illegal.
And how did he come to that conclusion? I mean, what was it that made him think, okay, this is something fishy going on here?
Stan told him. He said, I stole the money from Security Pacific and I moved it to Zurich and bought diamonds with it, using Lon Stein, whose name Goodgame had already given Stan. So then Goodgame knew, because Stan told him. Stan bragged to him. What he didn't realize is that Goodgame was an honest man, and he called the FBI and got a hold of Robin Brown. And now Stan needs to negotiate some of these diamonds, that goes to 2 jewelry stores in Beverly Hills and gets about $15,000 by selling some of the diamonds to them. They reported it to the Beverly Hills Police Department as a transaction. They were required to report it. And then Stan's problem is he needs to sell all these diamonds and figure out a way to do it. So he flew to New York, Rochester, New York, and met with an old friend, Paul O'Brien, and he gave Paul $6,000 in cash, part of which he'd gotten from the Beverly Hills jewelers. And he says, Paul, I want you to open a diamond brokerage store in New York. And I've got a bunch of diamonds from a real estate deal in Germany, and I will be feeding you diamonds, and you sell them out of the store. That sounded good to O'Brien. So Rifkin gave O'Brien $6,000 in cash as seed money. So Stan goes back to his hotel in Rochester. By now, Robin had spoken to Goodgame. Robin had gotten a warrant for Rifkin's arrest, and the case had hit the news. So that night, same night that he'd been contacted by Rifkin, O'Brien is watching the news and finds out that Stan Rifkin is wanted for this theft from Security Pacific. So O'Brien also calls the FBI, and an agent responded immediately to his house. And that same night, Rifkin sees either the same news broadcast or a similar one, and he says, I'm in trouble. So he Rifkin heads back to Los Angeles, and he contacts an old friend in Carlsbad, California, which was in the San Diego division, Dan Wolfson. Once he's at Wolfson's house, he calls O'Brien in Rochester and said, the deal is off, send me back my $6,000. So O'Brien says, okay, where do you want it? And Rifkin gives him Wolfson's P.O. box in Carlsbad, California. Of course, there's an FBI agent sitting right there with O'Brien at the time. We're kind of all over this case from the start.
Are you on the same squad with these other agents?
No, good question. I'm in San Diego. Except for the news, I haven't even heard about it yet. I was watching some of the same newscasts as everybody else. And on Sunday night, November 5th, I was at home, and the phone rings, and it's Robin Brown. And Robin starts to tell me about the case, and I interrupted him. I said, yeah, I know all about it because I've been listening to the news. He said, well, I think that Rifkin is coming to Carlsbad, or already in Carlsbad, to meet or stay with a friend named Dan Wolfson. He said he wanted to come down, and I said, sure, come on down. I was the senior resident agent, SRA, in the Vista Resident Agency at the time, and we had about 6 agents, all really good agents. We had a pretty good thing going. We made a lot of arrests, made a lot of cases. And so I called on agents, got them headed towards the Carlsbad, California Police Department where we were going to meet. Robin drove down with an agent from his squad in LA. We all met at the Carlsbad Police Department. In the meantime, I called a postal inspector I knew. It's already pretty late at night. It's probably by then it was 8 or 9 o'clock at night on Sunday night. But I got this postal inspector and I said, I need a address to go with this P.O. box for Dan Wolfson. And he got it for me. So we had an address of Wolfson. Robin shows up along with the resident agents from my RA. We all meet at the Carlsbad PD. And Robin gives us a good briefing. And he had Rifkin's photograph because Rifkin had not called his mother. He had a habit of calling his mother every day, and when she hadn't heard from him in a week, she reported him missing. So somebody went by her house and got a picture of Rifkin, and Robin had that.
Oh, how convenient.
Yeah, isn't it?
And that's what he gets for not calling his mother.
Yeah, right. So Robin also had his vehicle description. So we had all that going for us. Rifkin had spent time in San Diego before, in the San Diego area before, and we had a couple of addresses, hotels where he'd stayed before. And so we split the guys up in pairs. At the Carlsbad Police Department, we found a case where Dan Wolfson, Rifkin's friend, had made a complaint, and the case identified a female acquaintance of Wolfson, probably a girlfriend. So we had that address. First, we were just looking for the car, and we went up and down the coast looking for Rifkin's car, and we went by the address we had for Dan Wolfson, no car. So finally, after an hour or so of this, we had gotten nowhere. Robin was riding with me, and Robin said, Rifkin is not a good fugitive. I don't think he knows what to do. So I said, well, let's just go by Wolfson's and knock and talk. So we called all the guys back to the Carlsbad Police Department, and I made perimeter assignments for around the condo, Wolfson's condo, and I sent 2 agents to the girlfriend's house. So we got set up, and Robin and I went to Wolfson's front door, knocked. By now it's close to midnight. Knocked on the front door. Wolfson opens the door, and right away he puts both hands up and across the door frame, blocking the door. Right away his body language is telling us that he is probably hiding Rifkin inside. But we talked to him. We identified ourselves. We said, we're looking for Stanley Rifkin. He's a fugitive. And he just kept barring the door. And he said, well, I won't talk to you. I want to know what my rights are. I have to talk to my lawyer to see what are my rights. Robin asked him, he said, how long since you've seen Rifkin? And he said, I don't know. So we went on like that, and I said, is Rifkin inside? And he said, I don't know. And all the time he's barring the door. My supervisor at the time was there, and I went back, and he was just down the sidewalk a little ways. And I went back and told him, I said, we're going to go in. We think Rifkin is inside. And I said, please tell the perimeter guys that we're going in, and tell the guys at the girlfriend's house to go make contact with her. And he did. He had a radio. So
I'd like to use this as a teachable moment. So if you could explain to everyone how, even though you don't have a search warrant, how your arrest warrant for a person allows you to enter a home.
yeah.
I think that would be helpful for those who are interested in learning about, FBI, well, not FBI, but just criminal procedures.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's part of the intrigue, and I'm going to get into it in a couple of minutes. So
okay.
Can we
we can wait. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the supervisor, Dick Dalton, was there. We had our perimeter. And while we were there talking to Wolfson, I advised him of the harboring statute. And I want to talk about that for a minute. The harboring statute is where you can't harbor a federal fugitive. It's illegal. And at the time, the FBI worked a lot of fugitives. It's a good percentage of our work. Most of it we gave to the marshals over the years, but we worked all kinds of unlawful flight cases, escaped federal prisoners, probation and parole violators, bail jumpers. So a lot of our work was fugitives. So we often advised people of the harboring statute, but the U.S. attorneys did not like to prosecute people for harboring federal fugitives for whatever reason. And in my 28 years, I think I made 2 arrests for harboring a federal fugitive, and I'm sure I have warned people hundreds of times about harboring federal fugitives. So anyway, we did it as a routine, and we forced entry past Wolfson and went in. Robin and I are searching room to room, and in the last bedroom, we go in, open the closet door, and there's Stanley Rifkin in a bathrobe. We told him he's under arrest. We checked his clothing for weapons, let him get dressed. Stan advised him of his rights. He's very cooperative, very cordial, almost businesslike, and he confesses to the whole thing. And he turns over the $8 million worth of diamonds. He had about $12,000 in cash. He said, look, I'll give you the diamonds. He said, would you mind if I just keep the cash? We said, no, Stan, you can't do that.
I don't think it works that way.
No, no. In the meantime, Wolfson is being a nuisance. He's coming in, he's saying, Stan, don't talk to these guys, call your lawyer. And he interrupted several times. And we're trying to get a good confession and get everything handled. And we had found out that Wolfson was a photographer, professional photographer. He had a studio in Oceanside. So he came in and interrupted again, and he said, hey, would you guys mind if I take your picture, the 3 of you? And I said, I'll tell you what, Dan, you leave for 1 hour, and when you come back, you can take our picture. He said, okay. And he leaves, and Robin and I finished interviewing Rifkin. We've got the diamonds, we've got the cash. There's a briefcase there with airline tickets, and hotel receipts, other evidence that we did not take. And I don't remember why right now, but we didn't. So Wolfson comes back. He takes our picture. On the way out of the condo, I told Wolfson, I said, you're in trouble. And he didn't really respond. But he did tell Robin on the way out that he hoped that he could stall us at the door long enough that Stan could get out a window, but it didn't happen. Stan wouldn't have made it anyway because they had our perimeter. And Robin and I take Rifkin down to MCC, the Metropolitan Correctional Center in San Diego, and book him in there. We take the diamonds and the cash into the office. We get it booked into evidence. And by now it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So I dropped Robin off at a hotel around probably 4 o'clock in the morning. I drove home, got an hour's sleep, got up, showered and shaved, put on a suit, and went downtown, picked up Robin, went downtown to the office. And the press is all over the place. I never saw anything like it. Robin and I stood behind the diamonds that were displayed on the SAC's desk. And all morning they took pictures of the diamonds and us. And the SAC gave details to the press that he wanted to give. The SAC was Roger Young, a good guy, and he was really especially good with the press. So it was really nice the way he handled it. That afternoon, I went over with Robin to the U.S. Attorney's office and met with the chief of the fraud unit, Mike Lipman, a really good guy and a really good prosecutor. Discussed the case with him. They were going to have to do a removal, which is the federal form of extradition of Stanley up to Los Angeles. That's where the warrant was. I had, in the meantime, typed up an affidavit to arrest Dan Wolfson for harboring. And Mike said, I don't know. And at the time, Pete Nunez, the U.S. attorney for the Southern District, saw me in the office, and he walked in and heard what we were talking about. And Pete Nunez said, look, file it, go arrest him, and we'll figure it out later. So they approved the warrant. Robin and I went down and filed it. By then, it is late afternoon. By the time we got back up to Carlsbad, which is an hour away, we went back to the Wolfson's condominium, and he wasn't there. We waited around for a while, talked to some neighbors, and they said, oh, he's gone. And we don't think he wants to be around here right now. So I took Robin back downtown. We went back up to L.A., and the next day, and there's still a lot going on, of course, with the marshals and the prosecutor's office and the press. But we were really busy. But the next morning, I got away with one of our resident agents, and we went up and we found Wolfson, the photographer in Oceanside. We arrested him for harboring a federal fugitive. Oh, in the meantime, I had done a search warrant for Wolfson's house to get that briefcase and the airplane tickets and such. So we executed that search warrant. I think I got the key from Wolfson to get into the house with the search warrant. We got that. So we had really a good case, and things are settling down a little bit. With respect to the picture that Wolfson took, I thought, well, maybe it'll be in Newsweek or something. But one night in the Escondido Police Department, working on another case, and one of the clerks there, whom I knew, said, hey, I see your picture in the magazine, and she pulls out the National Enquirer. So Wolfson had sold it to the National Enquirer, and there we were, me and Stan and Robin.
Do you have a copy of that?
Somewhere, I think.
I'd love to be able to put it in the show notes.
Okay.
I mean, how many times do people get it in the National Enquirer?
Yeah, wow. And it was centerfold, too.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Not the New York Times, not the Wall Street Journal.
No.
Not the LA Times, but your photo ends up in the National Enquirer. Hey,
exactly. Yes.
Hey, people have to make money.
Yeah, oh, well. Yeah, I think he sold it to a couple of newspapers, so it got around. But the arraignment of Rifkin was the next day in court, the morning after we arrested him. And the U.S. Magistrate Harry McHugh, he was a real colorful guy. And the defense attorney appointed was Howard Frank, another former assistant U.S. attorney and another colorful guy. So Harry McHugh sets bail at $9 million. And Howard Frank says, Your Honor, would that be cash or corporate surety? And it broke people up. So anyway, it was about almost a week later, principal legal advisor, Gary Letourneau, in the San Diego office, he's an FBI agent, but also our legal guy. He said, I think you got a problem with the Rifkin case. I said, what? He said, it's the Prescott decision. We had legal training about every month, and we were up on all the court decisions, but I'd never heard of it. And I said, well, Gary, what's the Prescott decision? He said, well, it's new. It's just been decided and not well published, but you can't make entry into a residence to arrest a fugitive without a search warrant. And up till then, we could. If we had probable cause, we could enter a residence to arrest a fugitive without a search warrant.
Yeah, I have to tell you that when I asked that question, it wasn't a setup. I really thought that it was allowed if you had a reason to believe that somebody you had a legitimate arrest warrant for was in a residence, then you had the right to enter that residence. So
we did until the Prescott decision. Unless there are exigent circumstances, you could not once the Prescott decision came out. So I went back to the U.S. Attorney's Office and talked to the AUSA, and I said, we've got a problem with the Rifkin case. And he said, well, what's that? And I said, the Prescott decision. He said, what's the Prescott decision? So we went through it again, and he had to look it up because he'd never heard of it either. I went back to the office and called Robin, said, we got a problem, and et cetera. And I'm sure he called his AUSA and said, we've got a problem. And nobody had ever heard of the Prescott decision until Gary Letourneau. But the big picture is that Rifkin's arrest, his surrender of the diamonds, his surrender of the cash, his confession, they were all out. It was all fruit of the forbidden tree, as they say in legal circles. So none of it was admissible. And the judge in L.A. threw it all out. And the press had a field day.
Wow.
They really tore into us.
Since I'm not aware of the Prescott decision, I mean, I'm really blown away with this because it sounded to me like, you had the right, and I just wanted you to explain to everyone why you did, and you didn't. So what was the Prescott decision? Do you recall what happened in that case that this legal decision, this what do they call it when you have a case that sets a precedent?
Yeah, well, a precedent, but I think it might have been a Ninth Circuit case, which is Southern California, all of California, I think, and maybe Arizona. But it was a decision. I don't have it in front of me. You can look it up quite easily if you go to the internet. But Prescott had been arrested and appealed and appealed and appealed, and finally the courts decided that if you have probable cause to believe that fugitive is in a residence, you cannot make entry unless there are exigent circumstances. You cannot make entry without a search warrant for a person. And that's tough. I mean, you can't, if you find out somebody's in a house, you will have to keep it bottled up while you go get a search warrant, which can take hours sometimes. Now they have telephonic search warrants, but at that time, we didn't have even telephonic search warrants. So it was a really difficult situation for the guy on the street. I'll read you one headline. Judge says probe botched by FBI. And I don't think he said that. The judge was Matt Burns. I've been in his court a few times, and I really don't think he said that. But anyway, they made us look like a bunch of incompetent fools. We were following the laws we knew at the time.
I'm just wondering, I mean, here you are, you had this great case that you've worked with the Los Angeles division, and, you're excited about it. It's gotten all this press, and all of a sudden now, the tables have turned. Now people are ridiculing you. What was going through your mind at the time?
Good question. We were being heavily criticized, not by our management. We had full support of our management. FBI management, because they knew. U.S. Attorney's Office knew. And I talked to Robin, and he said, look, don't worry. We got a good case anyway. Without the confession, without the diamonds, without the money, without the airline tickets, we got a great case. We've got Lon Stein, we've got Gary Goodgame, we've got the people at the bank. He said it's still a good case. So the case was not dismissed. It was still a great case. So that made me feel good, and I realized then everything was okay. the press didn't print that because it didn't make for good headlines. So we're tooting along and everything is going fine. They're going through the legal process. Rifkin got removed from San Diego up to Los Angeles. His friends and family put up property and he made bail up there, so he's out. He had to report to his probation officer every day by phone, I think it was. So now here is the rest of the story. On January the 3rd, 1979, the case is still going on up in L.A. January 3rd, I got a letter from DEA. It said we have information on the Rifkin case. So I called him. The guy's name is Marv. I won't say his last name, but I know it, but I don't have his permission to say it. So I called him. I didn't know him at the time, but I called him and I said, hey, love to find out what you got going on Rifkin. And I said, but why did you send a letter? Why don't you just call me? And he said, well, the guys here said that you would steal my informant. He said, I got an informant. The guy said you'd steal him. And I thought, okay, here we go again. And I said, well, Marv, I wouldn't steal your car, your money, and I wouldn't steal your informant because all those would be dishonest, wouldn't it? And he said, okay, sorry. And after that, we got along good. He was a good guy. I was a good guy. And we got along good. I liked him. He liked me. But the deal was he had an informant who had met Rifkin in the Metropolitan Correctional Center in San Diego. And the informant said, Rifkin wants to do it again, only a little different this time. But he wants the informant to find him a banker who can get him a wire transfer code. So we talked to the informant, Marv and I, and we were always real careful about entrapment. And so we said, did you go to him and suggest it, or did he come to you? He said, no, he came to me. He wants to set it up, asked me to find a banker, and that was his idea. The informant said, I'm supposed to call him, or not him, but his girlfriend, Patricia Ferguson, if I can get a banker. So we put a wire on the phone, and the informant called Patricia Ferguson. They chatted. And the informant gave Patricia the name and number of a banker and gave her a good story about how the banker was from Las Vegas. And he didn't have the wire transfer codes, but he had an inside man at the Union Bank who could get the daily wire transfer code and get it to Stan. And he gave a name, Joe McAfee, to Patricia Ferguson, and a number for Joe McAfee. Patricia called Stan, and Stan, the next day, I think it was, called Joe McAfee. And they met. Joe McAfee had a undercover office in Beverly Hills. Stan did not want to meet in the office because he was afraid it could be bugged. So he said, let's walk. And he and Joe walked. Joe was wearing a wire. Joe McAfee was actually Joe Sheehan, and he was an undercover FBI agent. They walked, and Stanley laid out the whole scheme. He said, this time I want to get $50 million from the Union Bank, and all I need is a wire transfer code. And Joe said, well, I can get you the guy that'll give you the wire transfer code. And they negotiated some. They talked about the FBI. The irony is that Stan said, Rifkin and Joe Sheehan are walking around Beverly Hills talking about Rifkin's new plan to steal $50 million from the Union Bank. And Joe Sheehan is supposed to give him a inside man who will give him the daily wire transfer code. This time Rifkin is going to use the money to buy bearer bonds, which are negotiable and largely untraceable. So during that meeting, Rifkin says, they talked about the FBI, and Rifkin says, and I'll paraphrase, that the FBI is okay on mundane type cases, but something this sophisticated would be over their head.
And he doesn't know that he's saying that to an undercover FBI agent.
And worse than that, he says, the FBI, I can spot an agent a mile away. And again, he's speaking to an FBI agent. But the next day, the FBI up there arrests Rifkin and Patricia Ferguson and another guy who was a part of the scheme. Rifkin was supposed to be in court the next day, and I was up there, and Rifkin doesn't show up. The U.S. attorney said, well, Your Honor, he's in custody. Rifkin's attorney hit the roof, and he said, how could you revoke my client's bail? I object, and so forth. And the U.S. attorney said, no, Your Honor, these are in new unrelated charges. So we had him on 2 unrelated fraud charges. Here is the rest of the story. About a week later, I'm at home. It's a Sunday again. And the SAC, Roger Young, calls me at home. And he said, I've got a reporter in my office here from the New York Times. And he says, you set Rifkin up, and it was all entrapment. And I said, well, we didn't do that. It's obvious if you listen to the tape between the informant and Patricia Ferguson. There's no way. He said, put on your suit and come on down here and get a copy of the tape. I said, okay, so I did, and I walked into his office with a copy of the tape, and there was a reporter from the New York Times, and he said, I have information that it was entrapment. I said, well, it wasn't. It wasn't even close. And the SAC had a tape recorder on his desk. He said, leave the tape here and come back. Go to your desk, come back when I call you. Boy, that's unusual to play a tape, which is evidence for somebody. But I thought, well, at least he'll see that it's not entrapment. And on the tape, Patricia Ferguson was saying, she laid it out. She told the informant, she said, you're just a part of this plan. There are other parts of the plan of which you are not aware. There's other stuff going on you don't know about. And it was very clear that the whole thing was being put together by Stan. And the informant had said, you wanted me to find you a banker, and I found you one. So that's nowhere near entrapment. But the best news is for the reporter is that there is entrapment. And I'll read you that reporter the next morning. I'll read you his headline. Super swindler called just a pawn in a law enforcement agency plot. And he goes on to say that it was all a plot by the government to get the informant out of jail.
What?
So, yeah, that's what he said.
I'm going to have to try to find that article.
I've got it. This reporter, he wrote some books, The Falcon and the Snowman, I think he wrote, and others. So he was a well-respected reporter, but he needed his headlines. So the government agreed to drop the second case, and Rifkin pled guilty on March 27th.
That is not how I thought the story was going to end. I was thinking that the second case was the redemption for the first case, which had an issue with the arrest warrants. But at the end, even this even stronger, better second case.
It was, but there was no loss in the second case. And the lawyers just all got together and negotiated it out. Didn't really matter one way or the other. Rifkin got 8 years, and he read a newspaper transcript of the sentencing. He kind of argued with the judge a bit, which is always a mistake. And he got sentenced to his 8 years, and I heard that he became editor of the prison newspaper. So I think he did okay. When he was arguing with the judge, he said, Judge, I wasn't really going to go through with the second case. I'm just writing a book, and this is part of the story. But the judge didn't buy it. His attorney had asked for probation, but the judge wasn't buying that either.
That's a pretty interesting case because of all of the legal issues that it involved. Because usually when you have a case like this, one of the great things about a fraud case is once you can prove the fraud, follow the paper, follow the money trail, you have a great case. But there were a lot of extra things that were thrown into this one. So
there were, it was a great case, and one I'll always remember, and I'm sure Robin will too. Of course, most of the work was done by Robin, so he deserves most of the credit, but they had a lot going on in San Diego as well.
I had to go back to this Prescott case, which I did find as the legal precedent, and I'll include a link to the case in this episode's show notes. So when you have an arrest warrant for a person who is not in their residence, I take it then that you have to include, this bad guy is hiding out in his grandmother's home. What's the distinction? Because usually you have an arrest warrant, somebody tells you this person is hiding out in his grandmother's house, and you use your arrest warrant to go get him.
Well, you have to show probable cause to believe that, first of all, he's a fugitive, or she is a fugitive, and second of all, that they are in that residence at that time. Try and get around it. We ask for permission to search. Sometimes we could do a protective sweep if a person we thought was armed and we heard a noise in the back room. We would do a protective sweep. Sometimes we would just do it, knowing that anything we found would be illegal, but the guy would still be in custody.
So it wasn't the fact that you found him and arrested him. That wasn't the legal issue. The legal issue is that you needed a separate search warrant in order to seize the diamonds.
No, we needed a separate search warrant to seize him.
Wow.
The issue is we made an illegal entry into the residence. The arrest was still good because the probable cause to arrest him still existed, and they weren't going to turn him loose because there was still probable cause for the arrest, but the evidence we obtained as a result of the arrest was illegal fruit of the forbidden tree. There were a number of legal decisions afterwards, years later, that may have modified the Prescott decision, but none of them come to mind right now.
Yeah, there has to be, because, I can understand, again, that you execute the arrest warrant and you take your bad guy away, and now you find, that there's evidence in this residence or this business, and so you wait and you get another search warrant that allows you to seize that. And in this particular case, you didn't do that. But to me, that seems like the appropriate way that would have been remedied.
Yeah, you're right. Me too.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's somebody listening that probably has a better explanation that will help me understand this, because
probably, yeah. Yeah.
Maybe they'll send me an email and help me out here.
Well, it was tough for a while, but we worked it out over the years.
Oh, this is fascinating. This is definitely a educational case review. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jerry.
We're at the point where I'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So if you could tell us when you joined the FBI and why you joined the FBI, how did it all start?
I'm from Montana. I went to school here, and at the time, when I finished college, they had the draft. If you were 1A, you went in. I went in the Navy. That was 1962, and then Vietnam got started soon thereafter. My ship was over in Vietnam most of the time, it seemed like. So I got out. I had a young family and decided to get out because of the family separation. But I loved the adventure, the excitement. So I applied to the FBI, and it was a perfect fit for me. It took me a year to get in after I passed all the tests. NAC 11 in April 1967. Went to my first office, which was the Lubbock RA out of Dallas. And I loved that. The senior resident agency said, "You've got 6 counties. Here's your cases. Here's your car. Don't get in any trouble. Let me know if you wreck your car. And otherwise, you're on your own." And I just had a wonderful time. I'd go look for fugitives and stuff. Then my second office was San Diego. And I was in the North County most of my career, either in the resident agency or for 6 or 7 years, I had an office in the Escondido Police Department. And I just worked out of there. And after I retired, I went into the private investigative business. And then I retired from that and started working cold cases for the Escondido Police Department. I worked cold cases with retired Detective Chuck Gaylor. And we solved quite a few. And then eventually, after 6 or 7 years, I moved to Montana. And I live here on the river with my wife and 2 dogs. And I'm still working a cold case for a local department here and just enjoying life, getting outside a lot, going to the gym every morning and having fun.
Sounds like a nice life.
It is.
Well, I like to give my guests the last word.
Well, I love the FBI. I always will. I always think of myself as in the FBI family, and it kind of has defined my whole life. Very loyal. I'm loyal to the old guard as well as the new guys who are doing a great job. I know some of them. The public should really be glad they've got them because they're really hardworking, dedicated people.
And that's the end of the interview. At jerrywilliams.com, you'll find a photo of Norm Wight, a photo of Norm Wight and his co-case agent, Robin Brown, from back in the day when they were investigating Rifkin. There's a photo of Rifkin. There's a photo of the $8 million worth of diamonds that were seized, and lots of newspaper articles about this case, as well as the case law on arrest warrants. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. If they're not sure how to listen to a podcast, then have them read the post on my website, How to Listen to a Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to FBI Retired Case File Review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, or anywhere you listen to audio. This podcast is where I talk about true crime. But if you also enjoy watching crime dramas and reading crime fiction, then you want to join my reader team. When you do, you'll get a copy of my FBI reading resource, which is a list of all the books about the FBI written by the FBI agents who have been on this podcast. True crime, memoirs, and crime novels. And, in case you missed the big announcement, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, is now out and available worldwide as an ebook, paperback, and hardback, wherever books are sold. And guess what? My crime novels, Pay to Play and Greedy Givers, are now also available worldwide, wherever books are sold. So if you enjoy reading police procedurals, I hope you consider picking up copies of the books in my FBI Philadelphia Corruption Squad series. I want to thank you for listening to the very end, and I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.